How's it going, Chuck?
Doing very, very well, sir. Nice warm afternoon in southern Arizona, as pretty much all afternoons are until November. So, so there it is. You're out of California,
well, we should meet sometime. My wife and I love to vacation in Arizona. So.
Okay, I'm in Tucson. So.
We've never been to Tucson, and we've always planned to go. So maybe when next time we're there, or in the future when we're there, I'll look you up.
Well, this is the part of Arizona that has soul. So it's a beautiful country. It's very bucolic, and it's a nice town, nice little college town. So let's begin. What I wanted to do, and just tell you the course of the interview. I want to go into some other things with Twitter. How you started GotNews, what niche you were trying to fill, and I'll have some follow-up questions. But I also want to address, as a journalist, I want to address some of the controversy too, and eat the Brussels sprout first, give you a chance to answer in long form about certain things. So.
Sure, nothing's off limits. You should feel free to ask me any question. Go for it.
Awesome. So to start off with, obviously, I've heard from Dean, who's been getting some messages from certain folks and certain people saying this guy is a racist, he's a white supremacist, he's linked with these type of organizations. I have to ask you directly, are you linked with any white supremacist organizations? And if not, what have you published that may give somebody the opportunity to misconstrue what you have to say?
Sure. So the question is, like, what does it mean to be linked? I mean, not to be totally, I do talk to people who have all kinds of weird political views, Marxists, communists, whatever, white supremacists, rabid Zionists. And I believe in total freedom of information and total freedom of association. So I think that people have a right to go and talk to whoever they want. And the way I kind of describe this is like when I was a kid growing up, there was this pizza owner in my town who was like ridiculously racist, right? He was nasty to me and my Jewish and Asian friends and would just say terrible stuff. But he also made delicious pizza, and so we would still go and visit him, even though he was really terrible, and we could never tell if he was kidding or not. So right. I believe that there are lots of people in this country who have all kinds of political views, including men's rights activists and others, who I don't necessarily have to agree with, to still treat them as human beings and still listen to them when sometimes we agree, sometimes we don't. I mean, and from my perspective, anyone who wants to cut off communications with somebody because of their views, I think it's just not appropriate. I think you should try to find common ground. You should try and persuade people of your views. So that's always been my approach. Now, I do think scientifically, I do think Jews and Asians and Northern European whites probably are smarter on average than blacks, Hispanics, and Indians. I don't necessarily think that means we should exterminate people who are, who aren't as smart. And I believe this based upon a lot of the scientific studies I've seen, but I don't necessarily think it logically follows that we should harm people or anything. In fact, on the opposite, I think people who are smart should try and help people who aren't smart in the form of like charity, in the form of giving them jobs, in the form of, other ways that, that they can be properly charitable. So I'm not a white supremacist. I'm married to an Asian woman. I use chopsticks at home. I really like Japanese green tea. So, no, I don't really have anything to, do with that.
So you don't believe in segregation or anything like that type of
No. I mean, I do think people have a right to associate with themselves. So, like, if black folks,
right. I'm talking about government imposed, apartheid and that type of stuff. Or
no. I don't believe that the government should be organized in like a segregationist or Jim Crow manner. In fact, my first book on Calvin Coolidge, I wrote in favor of Coolidge being against lynching and against a lot of things, which was way ahead of his time. And so, no, I think that basically black folks, white folks, Asian folks, that they all have a right to basically their own property. They have a right to be treated fairly by the government, and they have a right to certain, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I think that doesn't just happen for Americans. I think it happens for everyone in the world. So that's my view, anyways.
That's fine. Yeah. So I'm not going to get bogged down in all that because obviously this isn't about.
And I would say too, though, like. I would say too that human society is really complicated. So, there are people out there who argue that apartheid was better for some blacks in some areas because they lived longer because there was no AIDS. And it's not my view, but I don't think we should just marginalize anyone who ever says any of that stuff. Obviously, I want to let people draw their own conclusions. I think, for instance, that slavery is wrong, but we would all kind of acknowledge that there are people out there who are, slavishly defending the media, for instance, or they're kind of mentally slaves. And I don't think that's necessarily a racial thing. I think it's like how human beings actually are. So, is that helpful?
Gotcha.
I don't know if any question.
No, that you recorded yourself very well. I mean, you have some scientific views, and obviously this isn't the forum to delve into all those. I just want you to be able to address that long form.
No, and I would just say, just generally, like whenever somebody calls you an ist statement, like a capitalist, a communist, a racist, a sexist, a men's rightsist, or whatever, they're really just reflecting the taboo of the time, and it's not really helpful. I mean, you should ask me, are these arguments that I'm making true or false? And if they're false, then help me correct myself.
Okay.
So, anyways, that's my basic view on that. But go ahead. I'm probably going on too long.
Yeah, no worries. Now, when it comes to GotNews, how did it get started, and what type of niche were you starting to fill? What was your vision for it?
So I had this view that there was a problem in the society generally, which is that the media holds an awful lot of power, and that they use this power to marginalize different groups and to basically define the parameters of the conversation. Sure, there was selective application of rules. There was sort of like a decision as to who would be the villains, who would be the good guys. And I realized that I had an ability to kind of reach a mass audience in a way that others didn't, because I had worked in establishment journalism before. And I stopped believing, I stopped believing that the journalistic community is fair and objective and real about the information that they present. And I decided that I was just going to go and say what I thought, present the information that I thought, and let people draw their own conclusions on the evidence that I had unearthed. And so I invite people to join me at, editor at GotNews.com. It's a crowd-funded, crowd-sourced publication. And we intend to break the news and cover the news that the media is not covering. We especially like debunking frauds, be they government, political, corporate, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Now, you said that you thought that certain groups were being marginalized, and you had worked in establishment journalism. If you can disclose which enterprises you worked for, and which groups specifically did you think were being most marginalized by narratives being promoted by the general media?
Oh, sure. So I won several awards at the Wall Street Journal editorial page. I wrote for the LA Times. I wrote for a whole bunch of publications, the Daily Beast. Okay. I try to run around writing for as many publications as possible, not because I necessarily agreed with them, but because I was studying how those publications worked. I always, at one time, imagined that I would start my own media company or my own tech company. And so in last year, in the election of Thad Cochran to the Mississippi Senate primary, which is a Republican race, I exposed that Thad Cochran team had paid black voters to show up to the polls, and that they tried to marginalize their Tea Party candidate opponent as a virulent racist with these radio ads that they ran in the black community saying that he was going to bring back KKK. And I thought this was really kind of objectionable and kind of crazy. And so I that's what I chose to launch the site with. Now, I would say that the news media in this country is predominantly politically on the left, mostly in the socially progressive left, that they have a left-wing kind of economic views, that they tend to have left-wing cultural views, and that they tend to represent a very small section of the overall country, essentially the population that finds New York, Washington, Boston, habitable and good places to live. And they represent a very narrow view of the country.
Okay,
so you're thinking about all these other views.
So it's like the coastal liberal type view is what you're saying. So
not necessarily coastal liberals, because I think there are lots of people who aspire to be coastal liberals. But I don't think that necessarily all liberals are reflected by them. Like, so for instance, the Gamergate stuff, where lots of liberals were pissed off about how they were being targeted. I think what it is it's like all these people who went to the right prep schools, the right colleges, they now have this right to control the media. And what's happened is that as time has gone on, the media, the amount of money that they can make has declined. And so standards as to what's professional and what's not have declined as well. And so what they do is they use their power in a bullying manner. You see this with Gawker, with Jezebel, with BuzzFeed, where they'll go and they'll try and make some, guy into the victim or into the villain and some damsel in distress. And it's a very kind of like progressive, weird view of how society should work, which is not something like why, for instance, should people be fired from their jobs because they have bad views? Doesn't that in some sense give the corporation a lot more power on policing people's thought? I mean, shouldn't you just be fired if you're bad at your job? That kind of thing.
Now, how would you reconcile that, and I want to follow up on that, how would you reconcile with your idea that people should be able to, for example, associate with who they want to associate with? For example, a corporation is an entity, and the person who runs that corporation or the people who run that corporation for business purposes have to determine which people they associate with for the health of their business. How would you reconcile those two types of things, which may seem
I wouldn't say
kind of
I wouldn't deprive corporations of the rights to fire people. I think they absolutely have that right, and I think that's like a first part of it. I would actually make it a lot easier to fire a lot of people at a lot of different companies, no doubt about it.
It's more an ethical thing with you. It's more an ethical,
Yeah, it's more like a should statement. Exactly.
Okay.
I have a lot of people that work for me and work with me that have crazy objectionable views in some areas. Sometimes we talk about them, sometimes we don't. Kind of like, religions. There are certain religions in this country that I find really abhorrent and disgusting. But I also believe people have the rights to practice them, and they're free to do it as they see fit.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think that's how the country used to be too, and I'd like to get back to that.
Yeah. So, when you started the site with Thad Cochran, did you try to reach out to other major news organizations and some of the other web-based organizations, a la the BuzzFeed of Gawker, to tell them the story and provide your evidence? And if not, why? And if you did, what was the response that you got?
Oh, so for several years, like after I graduated college, and even when I was still in college, I would write for all these different publications. And I started learning about what kind of stories are censored, what kind of topics are not allowed. And then I kept thinking well, why not just publish it myself? And why not just trust the audience will find me? And then Twitter came along, and I was like, oh, okay, I can use Twitter to disseminate this information. And I can actually create this whole character of being this kind of swashbuckling investigative reporter, and people will join me. People did join me. Lots of people, and I've gotten investors, and I'm going to be launching the next stage of my website sometime in the near future. And it's a very exciting process. It's very empowering in a certain sense. And I think people want to know, for instance, if they're fake rapes, they want to know the name of the girl who lied about the rape. And they have a right to know. If somebody has Ebola in their community, they want to know who is the person who's got Ebola and where do they live. And so that's the kind of situation we're in.
Okay. Now, in terms of naming people who have, that have accused somebody of domestic violence or rape or whatnot, how do you stop it at just at the level of, let's say it's a minor? Would you name a minor, or would you just start with adults and leave it at there?
Well, I think it would depend on the nature of the minor infraction. There's a case right now, the Tyler Coast case out of Arizona, where I think the boy is innocent.
Right up the street.
Right up the street from you?
Right up the street from me. Well, no,
yeah,
I'm in Tucson. It's the Phoenix. He came out of Pinal County, which is Florence. So that's in between Tucson and Phoenix. So yeah.
Oh wow. So do you agree with me that you think he's probably innocent, or what's your sense?
Well, I read the Facebook messages, and it's pretty obvious that these young ladies were conspiring to punish him for his sexual proclivities, or I should say profligacy. I should say. So.
Yeah. Well, he's been in prison for over a year, and
he's in jail.
He's in jail. Excuse me. You're right.
Have you been able to get in contact with his lawyer? David Cantor, because I've been trying to get in contact with his lawyer. I haven't gotten a call back.
I haven't been able to get in touch with him, but I'm very much committed to seeing to it that he gets a fair and right defense. I mean, the main thing that animates me in my work is that I believe that essentially all of your liberties are under threat. Your First Amendment rights in speech, I think your Second Amendment right to bear arms, your Third Amendment right to not have the military or police encroaching on your property, which is essentially what happened with these ranchers out there at the Bundy Ranch. Your Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights have been kind of reduced by the Patriot Act and the 9/11 kind of culture. Your Sixth Amendment rights to an attorney is being kind of, and to confront your accusers is being very much messed with. These anonymous accusations that are getting lodged against people in the internet culture. Now, I think I want to be careful here because I don't think, I'm not a lawyer. I don't believe legalistically. Like, I'm sure that, certain companies have rights to restrict speech. You can't yell at your company fireplace, kill the X or whatever, and expect to be, employed. But I also think we should have a culture of free speech, a culture of your right to confront your accuser, and that culture is being slowly eroded with the best of intentions by social justice warriors in particular, often allied with the government, which is always interested in more power. So,
cultural erosion.
So that's kind of my view.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I don't have kind of a doctrinaire right-wing view. Like, I think corporations can be predatory and violent and nasty just as well as governments can. And I don't think, for instance, that all unions should be banned. I don't think, so I have kind of complicated political views. But unfortunately, in this era where, you have to be a social justice warrior or else you're, the enemy, I've been forced to pick a tribe, and the tribe that wants to pick me sometimes is the conservative tribe. But I don't think that the conservatives like me because of things that I did, like exposing Alan West as a sexual predator when I did a bunch of stories on him and how he got in trouble for mistreating women and his and his staff and in his general orbit. And so anyway, so that's kind of what I'm talking about generally.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I tend to.
And I realized, by the way, that I had the skill set to expose a lot of these frauds that were going on in terms of research, in terms of the access to to people who could identify information. And I realized that we could save lives, we could change the world. And when I kind of realized that, I remember exactly where I was sitting at my kitchen table, in my pajamas, and I just started thinking, like, wow, this is really powerful. Like, I can change the world. And I stopped being upset with myself for not doing it every day. I started making a lot more money. I started getting a lot more attention. I started, my marriage life, everything was better in my life because I felt like I was doing what I was supposed to be doing.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. All right. So it sort of became a positive feedback loop that once you felt you were unshackled and you felt your calling and you pursued that calling, then everything else kind of fell into line. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten to meet billionaires over the last year to invest in my company or to hire as clients, or to have me as a client, rather, or have them as clients for research I've done. I've gotten to meet public officials. I've gotten to go and, I mean, like the level of access that I have, and I live in like Middle America. I live by my with my wife, and it's like I live a very kind of middle class life, but I'm able to exert an enormous influence in the world, and that's a very exciting process. And I think like one of the things that I do is I try and affect the Overton window of like what's acceptable and what's not acceptable political discourse. Because I named Jackie Coakley at the University of Virginia, other reporters were able to go in and do that story and expose more of the information there. I made what was acceptable. Anyone who was to my right, to my left or whatever, was in a position where they could, write something without having to worry about being too far out there because I was at the far pole. And so I was affecting the discourse that way. And I would argue that by exposing this and by blowing up some of these stories and giving them a lot more oxygen and a lot more attention, that what I end up doing is I end up educating a lot more people about these issues of fake rape, of these issues of censorship, and then I'm in a position where I can actually affect people's minds a lot more effectively than the mainstream media can.
Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, by the way, I'm glad you asked. I'm glad you pointed out you were talking about unions. I was thinking about people thinking about unions being banned, but I always kind of get them silent when I say that corporations have unions too. They're just called chambers of commerce and trade associations, right? So they essentially
look, like who does a job matters an awful lot more than what the job actually. So for instance, like sometimes unions can be bad, sometimes corporations can be bad because there are people and individuals in those organizations that are making decisions. Sometimes unions can actually save people and from being unjustly treated by their employers or by the government. So I support it sometimes, and I think we should really be less binary in our thinking about things. Whether union's good, whatever, or government's bad or whatever, we should be much more attentive to these are all human beings that are making decisions, and it actually makes it a lot easier to understand when you see it that way.
So you don't believe in institutions don't necessarily cause problems. People cause problems because of self-interest, and that all institutions can have benefits, but they can also run amok based on who's running them and and whether they're
right. There's obviously mission creep that goes on, right? Like you could believe in a Department of Education, but think that all of this Title IX compliance stuff is really kind of nonsense. You could believe in a Department of Energy and not think that it needs to restrict our ability to drill or mine or whatever. It's this kind of approach that a lot of the activists take of taking over institutions and pushing those institutions to really kind of extreme positions. I mean, they're kind of trying to do what I'm trying to do, which is they're trying to affect what is just acceptable in a society. And I kind of admire them for that, but I also have to fight them when they go too far.
Now, let me draw a sort of analogy. I don't know if you follow sports at all, but there was a gentleman named Jose Canseco who was a great baseball player during what
a White Sox player, right? Or he was with the White Sox and the Red Sox too, right?
No, he was with the Oakland A's, and for a little bit he was with the White Sox, but mostly with the Oakland A's. Won a World Series title. But he kind of broke the code of quote unquote not telling or not ratting by telling people about steroids, a lot of stuff that people didn't want to believe. And so because of him now, 15 years later, we have all this steroid and performance-enhancing drug reform. So people hated him, but they believed in what he but he actually set the course of change that was considered positive in much the same way I look at a guy like an Edward Snowden, who a lot of people, he's considered very much reviled, but he may be the reason that what happened last night and what we're in this reexamination of the Patriot Act and excesses and what you call mission creep. So is it fine with you to be the person are you fine with being the person who is considered reviled at first, as long as you are bringing awareness and as long as the broader mission is what is accomplished, and people can examine these issues more freely because you kind of took the hit, you bore the cross?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely true. I always refer to myself as a dissident, somewhat ironically, sometimes seriously. But yeah, I think that there's serious problems in our society, and I think that my views are actually held by the majority of people. They're just not always sure how to express them. So, for instance, all I want is for people to get due process rights when it comes to rape. All I want is for people. Everyone thinks rape is a crime. No one thinks that. Or very few people, I should say, think it's always and everywhere a good thing. And all I want is for people to have the right to free speech to express themselves. And so what I do is I push the boundaries of this to make it acceptable and possible for other people. And I think of myself as a trailblazer. I think of myself as a pioneer. I don't much mind what the critics say, because if I live my life according to just how other people wanted me to live, I would be a lot poorer, a lot unhappier, and I'd be a lot worse off. So I live the life according to my own reason and intellect, and try to draw and have people join me, like at GotNews. Try to join me in breaking stories and revealing information. And if people have cases of fake rapes that have gotten a lot of attention or can debunk something that's in the media, I'll pay them for it. I have no problem using the money that I've made to actually help people and to change the course of events in the world. And I think that because of what I did and the way in which I did it, and the way in which I kind of undermined the entire Rolling Stones story. I think that made it possible for other people to sue. I think it made it possible to save a lot more people. So I would do it again in a heartbeat.
Have you ever been threatened with illegal, in terms of, have you been threatened with cease and desist orders, or people from other jurisdictions, authorities from other jurisdictions saying you're violating our rape shield laws, please stop, or we'll seek to have you extradited, or threatened with a lawsuit on some of those specific cases where you were threatening to?
No, in fact, on the contrary, I'm often getting phone calls and things from really sad, really upset law enforcement officials saying, like, thank you for what you're doing. Here's more information. You can't say that I told you this. You can't, And so, on the contrary, in fact, I've never been sued. I've been threatened with a suit a few times. No one has ever brought one. I intend to sue Gawker over the summer. I intend to sue Politico and a number of other publications who've made up things about my past to try and marginalize my work. I always kind of expected that they would lie about me, and so I wasn't too surprised when they did, although it has caused me some damages, and so I intend to get the recourse that I can in the court of law. If I can't get it in the court of law, then in the court of public opinion. And I intend to continue fighting until the very end of my life on this good earth. So, and I intend to inspire others to join me and to take up and fighting for these causes as well.
Now, you talk about law enforcement officials, attorneys and district attorneys that called you or contact you and say thank you for what you're doing. On average, how many of those do you receive a week?
Probably like 2 or 3 major phone calls like that. I get calls from hedge fund people who want to know what I'm up to. I get calls from investors in Silicon Valley and elsewhere. There are lots of people who like to help me with things, but they don't necessarily like to be seen as being associated with me. So obviously in the near future, I have to work on making sure my reputation is a bit less poorly perceived. But I intend to kind of do that with some of the strategies that I've been employing, and which will become more clear to the larger public soon.
Mm-hmm. Now, but on the law enforcement side, the officials, about how many of those contacts have you received just in the past year, if you could give a round number? Just law enforcement, district attorneys, those type of folks, personnel, and those.
I've probably talked to hundreds of public officials, as lawyers, police officers, public officials, politicians. People have asked me to run for Congress where I live. So yeah, I mean, I treat them the same way that I treat anyone who calls me. Do you have information? Is the information true? Are you ethical and honorable? That kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, I've gotten into some trouble. They've tried to subpoena my records in Mississippi when I was as a journalist. I gave up all my information anyways and published it all online. And so they wanted to subpoena me, and I didn't show up for the subpoena. But in other cases, like I worked on the Menendez case of a U.S. senator who was having sex with underage girls, and was ultimately brought down on a corruption case by the FBI. I gave him the material I had to the FBI. I would do it again. I have other cases that I'm working on with the government, some of which will become more public in the days to come.
Sounds good. Now, getting to the gravamen of the current kerfluffle with Twitter, what was the specific charge that they leveled against you, if any, that you know of?
They've not said officially what I've done that's wrong. They've referred only once to saying that I had a targeted abuse thing, and they haven't explained what targeted abuse actually is. And they initially said it was a threat, and I said, well, what's a threat? It's not a legal threat at all. But basically, I believe what happened was I said that I planned to take out DeRay McKesson, take out being a common journalistic vernacular for going after aggressively people who are corrupt. I've used this formulation before, as has Slate, as has the Labor Party, the Conservative Party, the Washington Examiner, the New York Observer. I mean, I could go on. And even Slate has come out in my defense, saying that I shouldn't be censored and removed from Twitter. So too has Alan Dershowitz.
Yeah, Amanda has.
So too others. So I intend to fight it very aggressively. I intend to fight it on discrimination grounds, on contract grounds, on FCC guidelines. And without going into too much detail, I'm confident that I'll either get my Twitter account restored or I'll at least expose a lot of the problems that Twitter has. And I think that this is information that the public should know. And I think it's information that the shareholders in particular of Twitter should know, given that the company's share price is in decline.
Okay. Now, so you're saying that they used the phrase takeout and made that sort of incendiary, as if you were going to assassinate or harm somebody.
Right, and there's a Supreme Court case. Yeah, exactly. That was what they tried to do. And there's a Supreme Court case that was either yesterday or the day before, and which essentially argued that in order for something to be a threat, it actually has to be, time, manner, and place. You have to actually have an ability to actually go and harm somebody. And in this case, I'm not a violent person. I've never been arrested. People have always referred to me as extremely nice and gentlemanly in person. I'm a terrible shot with a gun. I mean, there's really no means by which I could ever be seen as a threat. And what's disturbing about it is DeRay McKesson, he knows, and many of the other people in the Black Lives Matters group know, that I have a history of exposing people who are corrupt within that movement. And I agree with some of that movement. Earlier we were talking about institutions. I think that there are some abuses that they're highlighting, but there are some abusive individuals within that group, like Sean King, who's stolen money from Haiti orphans and others. There's people like the child molester that I exposed, who was going on with CNN's Anderson Cooper. There's Wasim Masri, who has a history of being violent and of violating the law. So they were probably, the Black Lives Matters crowd was probably worried that I was coming after DeRay McKesson. And I intend to have more stories about sort of his cozy relationship with Twitter, other things that he's been involved in the past. And I'm not going to allow the censorship on Twitter to affect my journalistic capacities.
Okay. So you believe that the straw that broke the camel's back was a Ray McKesson issue, or was it was accumulation of other times that you'd use the phrase "takeout" on Twitter? Again,
well, it was just the DeRay McKesson issue. Look, DeRay McKesson is a friend of Jack Dorsey's, who is the CEO or was the CEO of Twitter, and who was co-founder of Twitter. And the two of them are close. There have been photos of the two of them together. So Twitter has a sort of problem that I've identified, which is it has a very few employees, but it has all of these kind of users that are putting people on block lists to remove content that they find objectionable. And so they'll go and report at safety, to remove people from Twitter. And I'm the first, but by no means the last, of the people that they've already started to purge. And what happens is that within Twitter, the people who make the decisions on who are suspended are almost all social justice activist types. And so what they're doing is they're ratcheting up what is acceptable and what's not. And so I'm one of those people that they've decided to persecute. Now, this is against net neutrality guidelines that Twitter itself has favored, against Twitter's terms of service. If no one serious in the country thinks that I actually was going to assassinate DeRay McKesson on Twitter, for $500. Nobody seriously believes that. Not even DeRay McKesson, who hasn't informed law enforcement about it.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So there was never a law enforcement report against you, right?
No, on the contrary.
Has there ever been
No, and on the contrary, Twitter, law enforcement got in contact with me because my website was hit with 3 denial of service attacks, which are, by either anonymous or by someone posing as anonymous, which were designed to censor me. So, on the contrary, the only serious threat here, the only, business damage stuff has been, Twitter against me, and DeRay McKesson against me. So, on the contrary. DeRay McKesson is also trying to claim, as Sean King did when I exposed him, that I'm a white supremacist, that I, work for the Ku Klux Klan and all this other stuff. I didn't even know there was a Ku Klux Klan anymore. Maybe there is. No, I don't work for anyone but myself, and that was the whole point of being independent. And so anyways, that's the kind of environment we're in. And I think that, they're mad at me because of the Jackie Coakley stuff that I revealed at the University of Virginia, which showed that there was no rape at all. I debunked the whole thing days before everybody else. They're mad at me because I exposed that Sony wasn't hacked by North Korea, but by an insider. They're mad at me for all kinds of stories that I've done that have gotten and changed the public discourse. And as a result, they want to punish me. They want to make things difficult for me. And so this is their way of punishing me. But, I'm not dissuaded. I've created many websites that have caused controversy in the past, from when I was in high school to when I was in college to as an adult. and I almost always win all the fights I get into.
So now, if someone were to say to you, Chuck, for example, let's say somebody states an opinion or a political view or starts a movement that you disagree with, would you bring up their personal past just to discredit them, or let's just say it has nothing to do with what they're saying, or if it's
I think
it
would depend on the context. So, for instance, Julie Bossman, for instance, wrote a series of, she's a New York Times reporter, wrote a series of articles about how great Michael Brown was, even though like all of his Twitter, Instagram, other stuff was showing how controversial his views actually were. So what I did was
Which Michael Brown? Which Michael Brown?
Michael Brown of the Ferguson case. She was a New York Times reporter, and so Julie Bosman was writing all these sympathetic pieces about him, and I revealed, like, hey, should she really be writing about this, given that she has her own conviction for shoplifting when she was right around Michael Brown's age? And that a lot of people found that controversial. A lot of people found that germane. I leave it up to the audience to draw its own conclusions. When I published the dick pics, for instance, of Brandon Boschan, the Amtrak guy who killed all those people, as a train driver or the train engineer, a lot of people were thought that was very controversial. And I said, look, this guy has a serious issue of putting his genital pics online and being very public about it. And here's, this is not normal behavior. People have a right to draw their own conclusions about it. Now, do I think I'm going to win the Pulitzer for that stuff? No. But I think people have a right to know their own conclusions.
But does it add to the, like, for example, with the first thing, with the shoplifting case, does that add to does it really add to the discourse?
I would say that it does, because it raises a question about the authenticity of the article. First of all, the information is wrong. Like, Michael Brown was not a very pleasant individual, chose to stay in certain places. He lived a certain life that ultimately, in my view, led to his death. Now, I wish he were still alive, just like I wish everyone, who's killed justly or unjustly is still alive. But the fact of the matter is, he made a series of decisions, and those decisions ultimately wound up with him dead. Just as Darren Wilson made a series of decisions that led to him not dying. And the New York Times and others decided to just go aggressively after this guy. And I thought that was really inappropriate and unacceptable. And so I decided to fight it and expose it.
Okay. Well, now, why would you think that someone's shoplifting conviction at the same age as Mike Brown would make them less wouldn't that seem like a bit of an ad hominem argument?
No, because the argument is that they were both shoplifting at the same time. Maybe she feels guilty that she survived and he didn't. Maybe she feels, conflicted. Maybe she thinks, that this shows white privilege in the United States, that she was benefited or not. It doesn't show somebody who's just very calmly and analytically just trying to find out the answer and the truth, right? It shows somebody who could have an ulterior motive, and so people have a right to know this. At least that would be my argument. Now, you might disagree with me. You may think that information's not germane, but again, the very fact that we're discussing it and the fact that I've offered it and you can form an opinion on it are things that other people think you shouldn't have a right to be able to do.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, what would you say to people who would say that that's a little bit self-serving?
Oh, it's absolutely self-serving. By far. No doubt about it.
You take ownership. No, I'll give you that. You take ownership. I like that.
No, look, it's absolutely, I'm trying to make the best case possible for the kind of journalism I do. Now, people can decide that they still hate me after the fact, or they still love me, or whatever. I'm just interested in exploding and exploring taboos in our society, and in using the First Amendment and using all the other liberties to advance those other liberties and to make people more aware of what's going on in the world, in the real world, not in like the fake media bubble world. So if people want to hate me and they want to whatever, they're right, and I defend their right to hate me, which is kind of how we used to be in this country.
Okay, very good. All right, Chuck. I'm gonna. If I have any follow-up questions, I'll probably follow up with you.
I would just say, generally, when it comes to the men's rights issue, in the past, I know because I know you guys are interested in that stuff. I did the Coyote Shivers story with the Polly Perrette case of abuse, And it is clear to me, like, I'm not a men's rights activist. I don't even know what that even means. But I do think men have civil rights, and I think they're not being properly addressed. And I think that
then you're an MRA.
well, if that's what it takes, I mean, if that's, you know, but I don't think that, like, I don't think that the progressive, I don't think we're ever going to win by trying to convince the other side of these things.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have to be aggressive in presenting the truth and let people draw their own conclusions and to force them, you know, to go after. So, for instance,
you and Paul are a lot more similar.
Right now. I have a story right now on Sylvie Kretow, who was the girl who lied about being raped at Columbia, in addition to the Nunga thing. And I have a story about that. And BuzzFeed is really angry at me for doing that story. And so they're going to write this hit piece on me, but they're going to end up promoting my work even more. So sometimes I use my enemies in kind of a jiu-jitsu position to have them help me promote my content.
It's a Streisand effect. Yeah.
It's exactly like that, yeah. Although the way I kind of describe it is like lots of people hate BuzzFeed. And so the fact that BuzzFeed hates me or Gawker hates me actually helps me. So it's kind of like a weird, you know, to condemn me is to promote me in a certain sense. So it's kind of a weird effect that goes on.
Well, I think you and Paul are a lot more similar.
Back on Twitter, and I hope to continue the conversation. And if anyone, go ahead.
No, that's kind of. I think you're a lot more similar to Paul than you would know, because he says every time we go on CNN or they do a hit piece on us or MSNBC, it just we get about 500 people a day that never heard of us that find out, well, you know, that he's not exactly like we thought they were. You know, we don't hate women. We have women that write for us and that type of stuff. So, you know.
No, and the thing that's weird to me is that, like,
you're a bomb thrower.
Yeah, it's just like I don't see why I need to go and say, yes, I'm the communist, or yes, I'm this. Like, people can draw their own conclusions about me, you know? Like, they can agree with me in part and disagree with me in other parts. And the fact that we can disagree and still be like civil means that we still have a civil society, you know? So, you know, I don't expect everyone to agree with my views on race or on freedom of association, but I do expect to fight for them as long as I can. So, anyways, that's what's up. If people want to find me, they're free to email me at editor@GotNews. You can feel free to publish my email address, and I look forward to hearing from folks. So, chat soon, man.
If you had to leave, if you had to leave us with one statement about yourself and your organization, and one tagline, just what would you have to say to your critics and for people who are curious about what you do? So,
we debunk frauds in government, media, and in the society at large. I invite people to participate in this. If you want to give us money, you can give us money. If you want to, join us in the research projects, you can join us. And the more the merrier. And we're going to build a citizen journalist army that's going to debunk and discredit and expose a lot of the corruption in this country. And anyone can do it. 10 minutes a day, 5 minutes a day. Join my email lists. We'll continue to get the truth out to people, and it should be fun.
Okay. All right. Well, Paul.
So thanks again, Ty. I got to go take a shower now and go to something right now. So, but if there's anything else, feel free to call me anytime about men's rights stuff or about other stuff. I'd love to hear more about the Tyler Cost thing when they have more time. But let's chat soon, man.
Yeah. All right. Take it easy, Jeff.
Be well.
Thanks for talking to us. Bye-bye.